Hello, what's up, guys? How are you? This is the Prodigal Shrimp once more, your boy Shrimp, and today we're back to another episode of Art and Adventure. So here we are again. I'm gonna do my design, my concept art, and since last time that we did this, I did a number with the sketch and finalizing it, and then started doing the values and lights and values actually. Okay. Anyway, let's see. Where are we? Oh, here we are. Okay, so this is the design I did last week. Yeah, last week. The ruins at the background. I think it needs a bit of adjustment for the values so that it will pop up a little bit. I'll adjust it and make it a bit lighter. And yeah, I'll do a simple lighting for this because I want to keep it as simple as possible. Yeah, and yeah, I just need to make this prominent so that it and I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's not showing up. Let's see. It's okay. Here, I just need to make this prominent so that they won't look like they're connected to each other. I can adjust the values for this one. Yeah, add some clouds maybe. And yeah, finalize the values for the character also. This is the the focal point of this design, so I'm gonna make sure that this looks good. And probably clean up some of the sketches. Okay, yeah. Anyway, after this, yeah, once again I'm gonna post the yeah, I'm gonna stop speaking and start playing the audiobook of the you know I should be learning this title already or memorize this title already. So yeah, the Dead Mage who doesn't want a fourth time. So yeah, we're in chapter 12. Let me just kill the music first. And then adjust the volume for my desktop. Okay, there we go. So yeah, so we're in chapter 12 right now for the Death Mage who doesn't want to a fourth time. And once again, gonna adjust the speed to 1.15 and let this play out for the story while we're doing the design. So yeah. So I think from the last time that we read from this, we managed to meet a new character named Zadaris. Yeah. Randomly managed to meet with Zadaris and the ghoul community. So we're going to hear more about the story of them meeting and how he would change the lives of the people in this tiny ghoul community and things that he may able to do using his unique powers. And also just remember that the character is in a revenge arc, or I might say a really good revenge story. Water break. Anyway, so yeah, enough dilly-daying. Let's just start with the design in the video, and yeah, hope you would leave a like and subscribe after this, and thank you once again for coming here and watching this video. Okay, let us now start.
Community. A toast. A toast to the savior of our chief. Delicious. The meat that the savior gave us is so good. Vandali had saved the chief Zadaris, and the ghoul community in the Devil's Nest had welcomed Vandali on the authority of Vigoro, the leader of the warriors. The ghoul village was far larger and more civilized than Vandali had expected. The trees of this forested Devil's Nest were densely packed, but they had been cleared away to create a plaza, and pit houses with roofs made using the leaves of trees were lined up in rows. Vandali wondered if the buildings didn't get too humid, but as this wasn't the Amazon rainforest or a subtropical region, it was probably not a problem. A well dug in the ground served as their water source, and there were fields for growing food, though they were primitive and only large enough to be called household vegetable gardens. There was also alcohol made from fermenting plants harvested in the forest, and a warehouse where meat from the prey they hunted was preserved and stored. The ghouls' lifestyle was similar to the people of indigenous cultures that lived in forests that Vanderlei had seen in TV programs on Earth. At the very least, they were far more civilized than monsters such as goblins and kobolds that relied entirely on hunting and gathering to sustain themselves. And they're living far more human-like lives than I have. Vanderlei, who also relied entirely on hunting and gathering other than the spoils from the bandits, realized just how important it was to have a stable lifestyle after seeing how the ghouls lived. A person only lived a normal life when the necessities of life like food and water were readily available. And the ghouls were using the meat as well as the bandit swine that Vanderlei had offered to host a banquet. There were about 100 of them in total. There were around 10 members absent on a several-day-long trip to hunt goblins, so that number was going to increase even further. Vanderlei wasn't particularly well informed on how monsters lived, but it wasn't difficult for him to imagine that this was the most civilized of the monster villages in the Devil's Nest. Incidentally, the leader of the warriors hunting the goblins was apparently Zaidaris's youngest daughter. For some reason, though she was a woman, she was born with more talent as a warrior than as a mage. And so the ghoul men with lion-like heads and arms that were longer than their legs and the ghoul women who were no different to humans other than their grey-brown skin praised Vanderlei, who had saved Zaidaris and offered them food and drink, as they enjoyed the feast. This sight was enough to calm Vanderlei as he thought, I did good. Even though he knew where the meat had come from, that feeling didn't change. Eating together with everyone made the food taste better. Vanderlei, you should eat too. Vigoro offered him a skewer with some well-cooked meat on it, but Vanderlei shook his head. I'm a little hesitant about eating human meat. Indeed, the meat that Vigoro and the others were roasting on skewers and boiling with herbs was the flesh of the 5 adventurers that Vanderlei had killed when he saved Zaidaris. In other words, it was human meat. Though the ghouls weren't undead as he had thought that they would be, their love for eating human flesh was just as he had imagined. Really? They're more delicious than poison toad legs, you know? Vigoro tilted his head as he eyed the roasted poison toad leg that Vanderlei was eating, but Zaidaris, who was sitting next to Vanderlei, chided him. Do not be so forceful about it. Vanderlei is a damper, so even if he drinks human blood, he does not consume the flesh. Is that so? Then how about alcohol? Vanderlei is only 1 year old, alcohol is nothing short of poison for him. Are you trying to test his resistance skills at a banquet? 1 year old? Is that right? I thought he just had a small body and he was surely older. Vigoro opened his eyes wide in surprise, but it was not strange for one to think that Vanderlei was older than he looked based on the way that he talked. In fact, it was to be expected that one would make that assumption. Well, he is a boy who uses magic, tames the undead and defeated 5 adventurers. It is not strange for you think that he is merely an adult with a small body, but is that so? I'm still just an inexperienced 1-year-old boy, though. Doesn't look that way. It does not seem that way. Zaidaris and Vigoro spoke at the same time as they shook their heads. But Vanderlei thought, they're probably right, and paid no further attention to it. In fact, even if one ignored the magic and undead, nobody would look at Vanderlei and think that he was an innocent 1-year-old. He was expressionless, with lifeless, dead-looking eyes, and his presence was difficult to notice. As Darcy had been killed when he was only 6 months old. His hair had grown freely since then, and the only thing he was wearing was an inadequate cloth rag. No matter how one looked at him, he would appear to be a ghost. Chief, may we greet the savior? Please, we are begging you. But it seemed that wasn't the case for the ghoul women. Several ghoul women were gazing at Vanderlei with their sparkling yellow eyes. As Vanderlei received their attention, he simply blinked. In all his lifetimes up until now, he hadn't been popular with anyone other than spirits, so he was surprised. Boy, these are the youngest of the women in the village. I am currently teaching them various things. The women that Zaidaris was introducing did indeed appear young. Most of them appeared to be in their mid or late teenage years. However, Zaidaris, whom these women were calling their chief, had the appearance of a young girl. How cute! His hair looks like a mane. Such pretty eyes, they're different colors as well. But they were certainly younger than Zaidaris mentally. As soon as Vanderlei was introduced to them, they began taking turns to hold him in their arms, as if competing against each other. Hey, you should not be so rough with him. They were lifting him into the air by the legs and holding him upside down. It was quite the rough treatment for a 1-year-old. But Vandali was a damn stronger than a grown man, so he was unharmed. Though he was unharmed, it wouldn't have been surprising if he found such treatment unpleasant. However, Vandali showed no sign of anger towards their treatment of him. Huh? Could it be that I'm popular? He had never been pampered by members of the opposite sex in any of his previous lives. Now that he was in his third life, he was experiencing romantic popularity for the first time. Vandali's thoughts had stopped completely in this moment, so he wasn't in a state to get angry over how roughly he was being treated. All of these ghoul women were beautiful, and as they were living in a village in the Devil's Nest, their clothing left much of their skin exposed. Even human men would have a hard time keeping their eyes off them. If they didn't mind the fact that the ghoul women were eating human flesh, that is. My name is Vandali. Nice to meet you. Vandali didn't care in the slightest. Thinking about it, it wasn't as if those human adventurers had attacked and tried to rape a human girl and then tried to sell her off as a slave. The one that they had attacked was Zadirus, whom society had labeled as a monster. Of course, selling her as a slave was illegal, but for that they would have only been charged with bringing an untamed monster into a town. It would be a very different charge compared to illegally selling a human girl as a slave. And at the moment that Vandali attacked, those adventurers were merely trying to rape a female monster. That was not an illegal act. What kind of country would enforce a law that made it illegal to sexually assault a female monster? Well, perhaps such a law would be enforced, but only to prevent strange diseases from spreading. Ethically, it might be frowned upon by female adventurers and guild receptionists. But it wasn't technically against the rules. In the first place, adventurers existed to exterminate monsters and protect the people. And though the ghouls could trace their roots back to the goddess Vida, they were defined as monsters in the Amid Empire and its nations. So it was perfectly legal for them to rape monsters before killing them. Therefore, Vandali killing the adventurers was an unwarranted attack, and taking the equipment from their bodies was exactly what bandits did. However, thinking further, one would ask, so what? The reason for that, Vandali was a damp. In the Amid Empire and its nations, he was not considered a person, but a monster. In other words, he was in the same boat as ghouls. He was a creature that attacked and harmed humans. With that said, what was so strange about him attacking a group of careless adventurers, killing them all, stealing their equipment and sharing their flesh with his companions afterwards? In any case, for those adventurers, Vandali was in the same category of creatures as goblins and poison toads. There was nothing unusual about what happened to them. If Vandali had been planning to fight for damp rights in the Amid Empire, then he might have been concerned about it, but he had no intention of doing that. He wouldn't do it even if someone begged him to. It was such a troublesome task. He felt more intimate with the ghouls welcoming him than he did with humans. If the ghouls were so happy about eating human flesh, then should he have been saving bandits' corpses? He should do that from now on. I wish my child would become as strong as Vandali, too. He's already 30 years old, but he's still dependent on his parents. Hey, can you stroke my tummy? So that my child will grow up to be as strong as you. My name is Bilder. If my next child is a boy, can I name him after you? Suddenly, Vandali's heart dropped. They were apparently all mothers or women who were about to become mothers. Their stomachs were still flat, so he hadn't noticed. He hadn't really thought that he would be able to form relationships with them, nor did he really hope for it. In any case, he was still just a 1-year-old child. Even so, he felt his mood plummeting. At the same time, he felt a hatred for his own personality for being disappointed over such a thing that he hadn't felt even when killing the adventurers. Hey! He is already tired and limp, hurry and let go of him, you fools. But from someone else's point of view, it seemed that he had simply lost his strength. Ghouls are undead monsters that were rank 3 at lowest. They show greater intelligence and societal structure than subhuman-type monsters such as goblins, orcs and kobolds, and the physical appearance of the two genders are very different. All of them possess yellow eyes and grey-brown skin, are physically strong, secrete paralyzing venom from their claws and enjoy eating meat. They are creatures full of vim and vigor, also possessing resistance to pain and poison. The males have the heads of lions and are suited to being warriors, as they surpass the females in physical strength and the potency of their paralyzing venom. On the other hand, the females resemble beautiful women, and though they are physically weaker than the males, many of them possess qualities suited for using magic, and most of them are able to cast simple spells. However, females that are excellent warriors and males that were mages also exist. Sometimes, ghouls perform a special ritual to transform human corpses into a member of their own. High-level ghouls such as ghoul warriors, ghoul berserkers and ghoul mages exist, and in the past, even higher-level ghouls such as ghoul tyrants and ghoul elder mages have been seen. This is all that I know about ghouls. Do you plan to stay in the ghoul village until spring? Yes. Also, Mom, ghouls aren't undead, they originated from Vita like vampires. Darcy had a worried look on her face, but as Vandali replied to her, he was expressionless as usual. That's what makes me more worried. If they were undead, they would be more friendly because of your skills, but that's not the case, you know. If they get hungry and try to eat you, what will you do? To Darcy, who had only just woken up and so had not seen the ghouls for herself, that was a very real possibility that she was worried about. I think it's fine. Probably. At the very least, I don't feel the presence of death here like I did when I snuck into Evpigia. Because of the ghoul's friendly behavior, he let his guard down to some extent, though not completely. However, neither Darcy nor Vandali himself had realized that his death attribute charm skill was working fully on the ghouls. Also, I need to wait until spring in a suitable place regardless. Zadyrus and the others have told me I can stay here as long as I like. Vandali had already confirmed with the top members of the community that it was alright for him to stay in the village until spring. The charm type skill in the meat offering had been greatly effective. Also, I want to have Zadyrus teach me various things in the time leading up to winter. That can wait until you get until the Orborn Kingdom. I can't say that, can I? Yeah, because I've realized that there is a problem with the guild cards. Vandali ran his eyes across the 5 guild cards that he had left in the carriage, which was now considerably emptier now that he had given the ghouls the alcohol. The guild cards were something that all of the adventurers had been carrying, and they had the adventurers' names and their D-class status written on them. Of course, he was planning to dispose of them later, but he had heard some very important information from the adventurers' spirits, so he had done a little research before that. Guild cards had the function of displaying one's status to other people. Normally, one would have to use a special spell or magic item to see the status of others. The owner of a guild card could apparently adjust how much of their status was displayed. They could decide whether to display just their name and current job, or show their job history up until now, or even show their attribute values and skills. That was up to the owner of the cards. However, when creating a guild card for the first time, all information is revealed to the guild staff member. Which means, the moment I become an adventurer, my skills and curses will be revealed. That's quite a problem. Normally you would be happy since they would pay you a reward. The Adventurers Guild paid out rewards to adventurers who discovered and acquired unknown jobs and skills. And the Death Attribute Magic and Death Attribute Charm skills that Vandali possessed were unknown skills. Darcy had first heard of them when Vandali had explained about his previous 2 lives. To be more accurate, she had learned of her son's skills and noticed that there were skills that she had never heard of before. You'd also become famous the moment you register at a guild. And you'd definitely get noticed by the Mages Guild. I think even your curses would receive a lot of attention. But I can't forget my skills or remove my curses, so I think it's best if I gain some knowledge, skill and strength before I register myself. For Vandali to survive in this world with no parents, he needed to secure his own social position, and for that, he needed to register at a guild. And since every guild used guild cards, Vandali's skills and curses would become known. However, as guilds were organizations that protected their members, Vandali wouldn't be unjustly imprisoned or kidnapped for the sake of investigating his unknown skills and curses. Even though Vandali possessed unknown skills and curses, nobody would be able to do anything about it, whether they were guild members or not. At least, not officially. Vandali knew well that not everybody in this world upheld rules and morals. I suppose there's no choice. It seems that Zadyrus person can use magic, so have her teach you lots of things. Even if you can't learn the magic itself, I'm sure you learned something that you can apply to your death attribute magic. Yes, Mom. And so Vandali came to spend some time living in the ghoul community. The death attribute charm skill has increased to level 3. You have acquired the strength and followers skill. At first glance, it was a blue-purple, fin-shaped, inexplicable object. It gave a wet sensation when touched, and it was partially soft. At the very least, it was an object that one would not presume to be food. Was it really edible? Was this some kind of joke? Vandali wondered this as he tentatively tried a mouthful. It had an unusual texture and its flavor was a strange mix of bitter and spicy. bizarre scent that was neither unpleasant nor pleasant ran through his nostrils. If he hadn't asked what it was made of, he wouldn't have been able to tell whether it was meat, fish or even a vegetable. "How is it, Van? How does the gobu gobu taste?" "It's delicious." As the tall female ghoul who called him by a shortened nickname asked him his opinion, Vandali gave an insincere compliment without thinking. His seemingly incurable lack of communication skills was displaying itself once more. "Van, what have you been eating up until now? None of us ghouls think that this stuff is delicious." But as Vandali was expressionless as usual, the compliment didn't have any effect. As he tried to say something back to the female ghoul who was watching him with pity in her eyes, he realized that his diet wasn't something that he could readily mention. The real eggs of big frogs. Other than his mother's milk and blood, those had been the most delicious. Well, there are a number of tasty monsters and fruits to be found in devil's nests. You're only a year old, so don't worry about it. The name of the ghoul talking to him and patting his head was Bastia. She was the leader of the warriors who had been out to hunt goblins and come back in the early morning, Zadaris's youngest daughter. She was a beauty, over 190 centimeters tall with toned muscles and feminine curves, appearing to be in her mid-20s. On Earth, she might have been a beautiful athlete or martial artist. And she also resembled Zadaris. Anyone seeing the two of them would think that they were sisters, born a long time apart. Anyone would assume that Zadaris was the younger sister, and Basdia the older one. Humans don't make gobu gobu, huh? Can you eat a lot of delicious things in human villages? That would explain why the adventurers were so delicious. No, I think they just don't know how to make gobu gobu. They don't know? Why is that? The ingredients can be found anywhere. Don't adventurers often hunt them? The ingredients that could be found anywhere that Basdia was referring to were goblins and gobu grass juice. Gobu grass was a purple-colored weed known as the goblins of grass. When crushed, it released a purple juice. It was a kind of magic grass, but it wasn't directly harmful. It simply grew in people's fields, sucking up all the nutrients in the process. This made the grass the natural enemy of farmers. And though it was a magic grass, it wasn't tasty enough to be used in food and it didn't have any medicinal uses, so it was quite a problematic plant. Its high rate of reproduction and the damage it caused without having a single beneficial use led to it being named gobu grass. And everyone knew that goblin meat smelled terrible and wasn't particularly edible. The same went for their blood and organs. Goblin blood tasted so bad that if Andali had the choice between drinking goblin blood and crushed insect juice, he would choose the latter. Such goblin meat was pickled for a whole day in the juice produced by crushing gobu grass. This neutralized the smell of the goblin meat, producing something that was neither tasty nor disgusting. This gobu gobu could be preserved for around a year. During times when we can't find prey to hunt, we make do with this gobu gobu. It doesn't take as much time or skill to make as dried meat, and it makes a convenient emergency food that you can store, but humans wouldn't go so far just to eat goblin meat. As Vandali said, rather than devising a way of somehow making goblin meat edible, humans would rather focus their efforts on farming or hunting more delicious creatures. Is that how it is? Satisfied with this explanation, or perhaps having given up on trying to understand it, Basdia returned to her task of chopping up goblin meat that had already had its blood drained with a butcher's knife. She still had to make gobu gobu with a dozen more goblins worth of meat. Basdia was the most skilled among the young ghouls, even including the males, but her social position within the village wasn't very high. The social status of ghouls was determined by strength for men, and skill in magic and number of children birthed for women. Basdia was unskilled in magic and hadn't given birth to a child yet, so no matter how skilled she was at fighting, she would never be able to rise to the top positions. Vandali thought about how the people of Earth would furiously label this way of thinking as discrimination as he ate the rest of the gobu gobu. Well, he didn't have time to complain about the society of ghouls, who were technically monsters. I want to hurry and give birth to a child so I can become important. If that happens, I won't be hunting goblins and making gobu gobu, but going out to hunt more worthy prey and focus my spare time on becoming stronger. Housework, making various everyday things, maintenance of the fences that surrounded the houses and villages and such were apparently tasks for ghouls of low social position, and hunting goblins and gathering gobu grass for making gobu gobu were included in that. Surprisingly, ghouls that were able to create weapons and armor were respected in the village, even if they were weak or had no children. You want to become important and strong? Yeah? I like strong people, so I want to become strong. Basdia looked like a female warrior at first glance, and her personality matched her appearance. There's also my age to think about. Basdia had apparently turned 25 this year. The physical appearance of ghoul women didn't stop changing until they birthed their first child, so she was worrying that her physical age might double Zaidaris's at this rate. As Vandali looked up at her, he thought that she didn't need to worry about that. If you were a little older, Van, I would receive your seed. Bug. What's wrong? Did the gobble gobble get stuck in your throat? Are you alright? Basdia dropped the butcher's knife that could decapitate a cow in surprise and raised Vandali into the air. She had no signs of embarrassment showing on her face. No, I was just surprised that you said such a ridiculous thing in such an earnest tone. Nobody could blame Vandali for being surprised at Basdia suddenly saying that she would receive his seed. However, Basdia gave a puzzled turn of her head. According to Mother, when there is a ghoul woman who's struggling to get pregnant, sometimes we capture a human man alive and have him give his seed in exchange for letting him leave alive. Apparently the seed of other races like humans have a higher chance to produce a child. Human men are cooperative about it, so this is apparently quite successful. Well, if their lives are depending on it, I'm sure it's no surprise that they cooperate. If any man was given the choice between dying and making a child, wouldn't he choose the latter? Not to mention that ghoul women were exactly like human women other than their skin color and eyes. On top of that ghoul women are all attractive, too. All of the ghouls that Vandali had seen since yesterday were beautiful. If their lives would be saved and they would get to have sex with one of these ghouls, wouldn't any man repeatedly shout eyes unless they had an incredibly firm sense of virtue or believed in the god Elder? At the very least, Vandali knew that he would do so. Even from humans' point of view? I'm happy about that. But that's impossible for me. Why is that? I'm already 25 years old. In the human race that most adventurers belong to, once you are past 25 years of age, you are made fun of as a middle-aged woman. As Lambda's medical technology was underdeveloped compared to Earth's or Origins, the life expectancy was short. There was magic instead, but the only ones who could leave their fates in the hands of magic were those with some degree of wealth. And few mages were able to use magic related to obstetrics and gynecology. And in this world, producing offspring was an important task. As mechanical technology was underdeveloped, the driving force in all industries was people. People plowed the fields, made the clothes, cut the stones used to build houses, fought to defend their countries. All of these required the people's labor. Therefore, it was common for the average person to be married before the age of 25. It wasn't uncommon for female adventurers to pass that age before marriage, but that was because those female adventurers were wealthy and had connections, or actually had partners that they weren't officially married to. Of course, the pregnancy rate for women in this world wasn't lower than for those of Earth. One could still bear children in their 40s, but women past their mid-20s were called middle-aged women, encouraging them to hurry up and have children. But Basdia had no way of knowing these exact societal circumstances, so her perceptions were based on vague stories that she had heard from ghouls who had eavesdropped on human conversations. I don't think it's something you should worry about too much. I think you're still very young, Basdia-san. Vandali wasn't particularly knowledgeable about human society either, so he had wondered, aren't the humans of this world worrying about their age too much? As he had only lived on Earth as a high school student and only made it to the age of 20 in Origin, it was difficult for him to understand the importance of leaving descendants behind. I'm happy that you're saying that. As Basdia smiled, she looked truly beautiful and attractive. Vandali was close to her beautiful skin as she was holding him, and if he was an adolescent, he would probably be unable to help but to stare at the deep cleavage between her breasts. The fact that she could become so beautiful while eating only meat was probably because of the biological differences between ghouls and humans. Now that I think about it, I heard from Mother that you are able to use unusual magic, Vandali. Isn't there a spell that you could use to make yourself able to give me your seed? I have heard that there is a life attribute spell that can cause the rapid growth of one body part. I think that's a bit impossible. However, it seemed that Basdia's complex was deeper than Vandali had thought. He thought about capturing a bandit or adventurer alive and offering him to her next time, but that in itself made him feel uncomfortable. I see. I am sorry that my daughter asked the impossible of you. Zaidaris, hearing Vandali's story in her own house, lowered her head a little. Of course, her daughter producing a child was a matter of great concern to her as well. It will take around 10 years for you to grow old enough to give her your seed normally, Vandali. At her current age, she will be able to wait that long. I may have pressured her too much in my desire to see my first grandchild. I am more surprised that you know what seed and such words mean, boy. Well, I don't think it's that unusual. Now that Zediris mentioned it, a normal 1-year-old infant wouldn't understand the meaning behind having one's seed asked for. Now that Zediris mentioned it, a normal 1-year-old infant wouldn't understand the meaning behind having one's seed asked for. Realizing this, Vandali gave a vague explanation. He had good impressions of Zediris, Vigoro and Basdia, but he was still hesitant to tell them about his past lives. More importantly, what do you mean by first grandchild? Well, I suppose I understand even without you explaining. Vandali, hearing the pleasured voices of men and women coming through the gap between the leaf ceiling and wooden walls of the pit dwelling, gave a shrug of his small shoulders. The owners of the voices were ghouls of the village. It seemed that ghouls didn't have a system or the values for marriage, and it was common to spend the night with multiple members of the opposite sex. This was because of the fact that ghouls lived in a dangerous devil's nest, the fact that the women's aging didn't stop until they became pregnant, and the fact that it was very difficult for them to get pregnant despite their long lifespans. If every ghoul had only one partner, the village couldn't be maintained. Vandali guessed that this was the reason that Zediris didn't have a grandchild yet. She had apparently given birth to 2 males before Basdia, but since DNA testing didn't exist in this world, there was no way to be sure that they were the fathers of any children. In fact, at the banquet yesterday, nobody had introduced their husband, wife, grandchildren or grandparents. Indeed, that is how it is. Zediris didn't deny it. This was how ghoul society worked. Well, I know who Basdia's father is. Who is it? It is Vigoro. Basdia was 25 years old. That meant that Zediris had been 265 years old when she had given birth to her. At that age, even ghouls were considered to be very old, and considering the physical burdens, it was unusual for one to produce children at such an age. However, at the time, they had fought kobolds and drank the alcohol that the kobolds had stolen from humans. That alcohol was much stronger than the alcohol we make in the village. I became drunk on it, and the next time I opened my eyes, the sun was rising and I was in the same bed as him. I see. It was the story of a conception without a single trace of romance. You should be wary of alcohol, boy. Even if you drink, do not become consumed by the alcohol. Now then, shall I teach you the basics of magic? Though weakened by her old age, Zediris was a ghoul. Of course, she couldn't use death attribute magic, but the basics that she could teach were likely to be beneficial for Vandali. And while Vandali was learning the basics of magic from Zediris, Bone Man, Saria and Rita were being taught how to fight by the ghoul warriors. Sam, Bonebird and the other undead were helping with things around the village. Helping with the hunting in the Devil's Nest gained them experience points, speeding up their growth. And so Vandali began his first non-self-taught lessons. Name, Vigoro rank, 5 race, Ghoul Barbarian level, 78 job, non-job level, 100 job history, non-age, 167 years old. Passive skills, night vision pain resistance, level 4 superhuman strength, level 4 paralyzing venom secretion, claws, level 1 active skills, axe technique, level 4 unarmed fighting technique, level 2 commanding, level 3 coordination, level 2 name, Basdia rank, 4 race, ghoul warrior level, 17 job, non-job level, 100 job history, non-age, 25 years old. Passive skills, night vision superhuman strength, level 2 pain resistance, level 2 paralyzing venom secretion, claws, level 3, active skills, axe technique, level 2 shield technique, level 1 archery, level 2 throwing, level 1 silent steps, level 1 coordination, level 1, status effects, infertility. Monster explanation, ghoul warriors. These are ghouls with enhanced fighting ability. They lead small groups of ghouls and, in cases where other higher-ranking ghouls aren't present, entire tribes. They not only fight with their venomous claws, but they are proficient in the use of unarmed fighting techniques and weapons, and employ martial arts in battle. As their appearance is not very different from regular ghouls, there are cases where unsuspecting adventurers are overwhelmed by them, so caution must be taken. The right ear is used as proof of exterminating them. Materials that can be obtained from them include their fangs, claws and their livers, which can be used in medicine. For a normal ghoul to become a ghoul warrior, he or she must possess multiple martial type skills at level 2 or higher. However, most ghouls meet that requirement before reaching level 100. As Bazdia has more physical ability than talent for magic, she focused on that and became a ghoul warrior. Though this has caused her to receive the status effect of infertility, it has had no negative effect on her attribute values or skills. Monster explanation: Ghoul barbarians. These are ghouls that have increased their rank and then polished their martial skills and increased their superhuman strength skill even further. They possess larger bodies than most ghouls, and enjoy swinging their weapons to mow down their enemies in battle. Many ghoul barbarians lack intelligence, thinking only about combat. Because of this, most of them have low social positions and are simply made use of by ghoul mages. The qualities of ghoul barbarians are possessed only by males. There have been no confirmed cases where a female ghoul has become a ghoul barbarian. The right ear is used as proof of exterminating them. Materials that can be obtained from them include their fangs, claws, tendons that can be used to make bowstrings and their mana-soaked manes. For a ghoul to become a ghoul barbarian, he must possess their superhuman strength skill at level 3 or higher and a level 4 skill in the use of a two-handed weapon. Unlike other ghoul barbarians, Vigoro is relatively intelligent and stands in a position to become the next chief. In addition, he has an exceptional ability for commanding others, so while most ghoul barbarians enjoy fighting alone, Vigoro always leads his companions to battle. These factors make him more difficult to defeat than most ghoul barbarians. Chapter 13, The Surprises That Shorten a Lifespan Too Much. Well then, first of all, can you tell me about the magic you use and the skills you know, boy? Of course, if you do not wish to tell me, I will not press you any further. No, I trust you there'll be 100 or so guys who know about it in the future anyway. In order to learn the basics of magic, telling Zadyrus about his magic and skills was necessary for Vandali. He would be able to receive guidance and advice based on her knowledge and experience. However, that meant giving Zadyrus information regarding his death attribute magic. Even normal adventurers and monsters would be hesitant about freely giving away information regarding their skills. This was because doing so revealed all of one's weaknesses. However, sharing that information with people that one trusted was not uncommon. For adventurers, keeping one's skills a secret from party members would impede teamwork. But for monsters, this may be another story. And though it was still some decades away, there would be 100 people coming from Origin and reincarnating here, and all of them would know about Vandali's death attribute magic. Even if by some miracle Rodcorti didn't tell them about Vandali's death attribute magic, there would likely be data left at the laboratory that he had been imprisoned in, and magic items created using his death attribute magic were already widely circulating in Origin. At that time, those items were advertised as having been created not through death attribute magic, but independently developed life attribute magic, but surely their true nature would have been discovered by now. Therefore, it could be assumed that Amamiya Hiroto and the others found out about Vandali's death attribute magic after he died in Origin. It was extremely unlikely that they wouldn't know about it. That was why Vandali couldn't see a reason to keep it a secret from someone like Zadyrus, whom he trusted. 100 people? Well, in any case, about your magic, boy dash. Right now, Zadyrus was under the impression that Vandali's magic was a special kind of life attribute magic. At first, one would think that the undead were completely unrelated to life attribute magic, but in Lambda, the only ones who could control the undead were life attribute mages. They forcefully poured life force into corpses, creating creatures with fake life that moved artificially. Since such undead were forced into this unnatural state, they were fundamentally weaker than undead that appeared in devil's nests and dungeons. Zadyrus had thought that Vandali was using a special spell that overcame these limitations, so she was rendered speechless when Vandali told her about his death attribute magic. Death attribute. A new A9th attribute. Such a thing really exists? No, I suppose it is true. You actually control the undead and cast spells that I have no knowledge about. In Origin, the death attribute was the 8th attribute, but unlike Origin, the time attribute existed in Lambda, so that made the death attribute the 9th attribute. So you're surprised after all? That goes without saying. Any monster that knows the potential value of a new attribute's magic would show interest. For monsters, magic was a power that allowed them to survive, as well as rise up in a society where the strong stood on top. Nobody would know how to fight against a user of unknown spells. Since the entirety of the death attribute was unknown, there would be any number of ways to kill an enemy on sight with no reaction. Like Origin, in Lambda, One cannot learn magic for an attribute unless he or she possesses an affinity for that attribute. That applied for monsters as well, so not all monsters would be capable of this, but there was a very real concern that monsters with Mage in their race title could somehow steal the techniques. I see. The reason that Adventurer Mage couldn't cast spells was because of this death attribute magic. Zadyrus shuddered as she recalled how the mage among the adventurers who had attacked her had died. As a ghoul mage herself, it was easy for her to imagine the horror of having one's magic taken away as a mage. It would be equivalent to taking away a swordsman's arms and telling him to kick his enemies to death. Thinking this, she felt a little sympathy for the adventurers, though it was far too late for that now. In that case, since I only have affinities for light and wind attribute magic, I cannot directly teach you death attribute magic, but I can help you make use of the magic that you do know. Magic is such an art that I can do this. At first, one would assume that the fire attribute and the water attribute are opposites. However, the essence of the fire attribute is heat, while the water attribute is in liquid and cold. Therefore, a master mage of the fire attribute would be able to freely increase the heat to burn something, or lower it and freeze it. A master of the water attribute would be able to manipulate molten lava like his own arms and legs, since it is a liquid. A user of the earth element would be able to manipulate mercury and lava, while a user of the wind element would be able to use the flammable components of air to create a large explosion. Things regarding this were written in a book that the chief showed me when I was a child. Zadyrus had gained that knowledge from books looted from adventurers. For monsters, books could only be obtained by stealing them from humans or other monsters, so they were hard to come by. In other words, the important thing is not the number of attributes that you have an affinity for, but how much you increase your skills. Of course, it is convenient to be able to use multiple attributes. However, there are cases where adventurers skillful enough to cast spells of multiple attributes, but only have superficial knowledge of those attributes, are defeated by goblin mages that can only use the fire attribute. Now that you put it that way, I'm starting to feel motivated. For Vandali, to whom the researchers of Origin had said you should focus only on death attribute magic and your mana pool, Zadyrus's teachings were refreshing and a source of happiness for him. He even began to feel passionate about it. Though there was no change to his outward appearance as he was expressionless as always. And what is necessary for that skill is mana. The amount of mana you possess is directly related to the length of time you are able to cast your spells. How much mana do you have, boy? I will have to adjust the length of our lessons based on that. Yes, it's around 100 million. I see, 100 million what? As Zadyrus was astonished once more, she wore a facial expression suitable for her young appearance that Vandali thought was adorable. 100 million, is that true? I do not even possess 10,000, but you, boy, know, considering that you are using unknown magic as well, it is not that unusual, I suppose? Zadyrus was bewildered by the unbelievable number given in Vandali's self-report of his mana pool. Normally, one would laugh this off as a poorly told lie, but the child in front of her eyes had a persuasiveness that prevented her from doing so. At the very least, that was how Zadyrus felt. And in any case, Vandali would not benefit from telling such a poor lie. Exaggerating his mana pool a little to impress her would be one thing, but 100 million was a number that was beyond exaggeration. And since he was about to undergo lessons to learn the basics of magic, such a lie would be quickly exposed. Well, it is fine. I will understand your mana pool soon enough, boy. Zadyrus managed to swallow her surprise, with difficulty. Meanwhile, Vandali realized from her reaction that having a mana pool of 100 million was abnormal after all. He decided not to mention it too much if he ever found himself in human society, though it would be exposed if he registered himself at a guild. Well then, what magic-related skills do you possess? To start off, I have Thegend Revocation skill. And Theglum Transmutation skill. Does that count as a magic-related skill? Boy, just how much do you plan to shorten my remaining lifespan? In fact, I should ask you to teach me the basics I need to learn Thegend Revocation skill. And I have never even heard of Theglum Transmutation. Vandali had heard about how rare the chant revocation skill was from Dasa, but seeing as even Zadyrus was surprised, despite having lived for nearly 300 years, it seemed to be rarer than he had thought. However, since Zadyrus seems to have the alchemy skill, he had thought that she would know about his Theglum Transmutation skill. He had assumed that golems were created using alchemy, based on the fiction that he had read on Earth. Even if you want me to teach you the basics for chant revocation, all you have to do is use magic in a situation where you can't chant to cast spells, you know? The only one who can do that is you. Boy, thanks to that mana pool of yours. In order to cast a spell without its chant while maintaining the same effect, dozens or even hundreds of times the mana would be required. Therefore, even skilled mages would be able to perform such a feat only once a day, if at all. Vandali was only capable of repeating this to the point of obtaining the skill because of his abnormally vast mana pool. The only others who would be capable of obtaining Thetian Revocation skill normally were incredibly talented mages who had mastered multiple magic-related jobs and legendary monsters. At this rate, it seems that I will not need to teach you the basics after all. I am sure that your ability with no attribute magic and Themina control skill is perfect, is it not? As Zediris spoke in a tone that sounded as if she had lost her confidence, this time it was Vandali's turn to be surprised. What is no attribute magic? How is it that you do not know what it is? It is the most fundamental, basic magic. Zediris was surprised again as well. As its name suggests, no attribute magic is magic that uses mana before it has changed into any attribute. Since no attributes are involved, anyone can use this magic as long as they have mana, so it was common for mages to first learn no attribute magic to learn the fundamentals of controlling one's mana. No attribute magic is weaker than magic with an attribute, and only consists of simple spells, but since it is simple, it is also easy to learn and use. Even we who live in the Devil's Nest know it. I don't know it because I'm self-taught. And the biggest reason that Vandali didn't know about it was because no attribute magic hadn't existed in origin, the world in which he had lived his previous life. Did it really not exist, or did the researchers at the laboratory deliberately not tell him about it? The chances of it being the latter were 80 or 90%, but he had no way to confirm that now. Vandali decided to ask Hiroto and the others when they reincarnated here, if he got the chance. At the very least, the researchers had never mentioned no attribute magic to Vandali. Their spirits likely knew, but other than answering Vandali's questions, they had only talked nonsense. If Vandali had supplied them with mana like he was doing for Dasa now, then perhaps they could have been preserved without having their personalities collapsing, but at the time, he had been unable to use his own mana freely. Of course, Dasa knew about no attribute magic. When Vandali asked her about it later, she told him that she had simply assumed that Vandali had known all about it and not bothered teaching him. You were able to use magic without anyone teaching you, Vandali, so I was sure that you knew about it, something like that. Well then, we shall start with no attribute magic, I suppose. It took me 3 years to obtain the skill. I am sure it will not even take you a year, boy. With your mana pool, you will not have any problems practicing all day, after all. Vigoro, leader of the ghoul warriors, suddenly spotted a weed growing near his foot and knew that spring was coming soon. For ghouls, who didn't use calendars or civilized agricultural techniques, seasons were nothing more than things that they could feel around them. Humid air and pouring rain meant a rainy season, hot weather was summer, when it became a little cooler and more fruit was available than normal, it was autumn, when the air became dry and cold, it was winter. And when it became warm again and these weeds whose names they didn't know began to grow, it was spring. It's already been half a year since he came, huh? Considering the number of years and months that Vigoro had lived, half a year wasn't a significant amount of time. However, in that short period of time, life had changed in the village that Vigoro had lived in for over 100 years. As thanks for taking care of him, Vandali had used death attribute magic to preserve the ghouls' food. With a spell called preservation, raw meat that even the ghouls with their strong stomachs couldn't eat after several days lasted for several months. Up until now, the only preserved food the ghouls had used were gobu-gobu and meat dried on sunny days, so this was a source of great convenience. The ghouls no longer had to go out to hunt every day, which meant they had more time to train themselves, and there were fewer cases of injuries as well. Well, ghouls were a race that were sloth-like in nature, so this caused some individuals to slack off as well. That was kept in check by Zediris, who had been teaching the importance of studying and putting one's effort into things, and Vigoro, who knew the importance of those intuitively. And the meat that he prepares for us is incredibly delicious. Vandali applied the maturation spell on the raw meat that the ghouls ate, just before it was served. To produce the same effect on Earth, one would have to cure meat for days or weeks in a room with carefully regulated temperature and humidity, but with this spell, it was possible to produce such meat in this village that had nothing but pit dwellings and a warehouse. This was nothing short of a blessing for the ghouls. Perhaps thanks to this delicious meat, their bodies felt healthier and they somehow felt even stronger than before. It seemed that Vandali planned to leave once it was spring, but there were many, including Vigoro, who wanted him to stay in the village. If he were an adult, They would offer him several women for his personal use, but such an offer was rather difficult to make to a child less than 2 years old. However, it seemed that the lessons for his skills with Zadyrus would take some more time, so he might end up staying until summer. Vandali was a good person, so Vigoro wanted his studying to go well, but at the same time, Vigoro wanted him to stay as long as possible. What a complicated mix of feelings. While Vigoro was dealing with these difficult emotions, his apprentices were hunting a powerful enemy. Go. Kill the ones with the bows, no, the one with the staff first. Vigoro's apprentices and their prey were engaged in a group battle. But their prey were not adventurers. Vigoro and his warriors attacked adventurers less frequently than Vandali had imagined, and adventurers didn't come to the Devil's Nest very often in the first place. When the current chief Zadyrus was younger, there had been an incident in which 2/3 of the village's population were hunted down by a group of adventurers, so not attacking adventurers unless necessary was a law in the village. If adventurers were discovered, the ghouls hid and waited until they passed by, and only fought if the adventurers attacked them. Ghouls knew the delicious taste of adventurers' flesh and how valuable their equipment was, but they knew even better than that just how terrifying adventurers could be. But it was unknown how adventurers were dealt with by other ghoul villages. And though Vigoro and the others were unaware of this, the reason that few adventurers came to this Devil's Nest was because of its location. The size of this Devil's Nest and the monsters that appeared in it was perfectly suited for D or class adventurers to venture into. However, the nearest human town was 3 days' travel away. And there was another similarly sized Devil's Nest only a few hours away from that nearby human town that even had multiple dungeons. Therefore, it was natural for the adventurers to focus on the Devil's Nest that was closer to the town, since it even had dungeons as well. Of course, leaving this Devil's Nest alone and allowing the monsters to multiply and overflow out of it would be a big problem, but the Adventurers Guild had decided that the risk of that happening was low. The reason for that was that the Devil's Nest that Vigoro and the other ghouls lived in had many demi-human-type monsters. It was filled with villages of goblins, kobolds, orcs as well as ghouls, and they often fought each other, so even if adventurers didn't come to thin out the monster numbers, the monsters regulated their own population. That was why the humans had decided that it wasn't necessary to come all the way out to this Devil's Nest. It was a problem to leave it alone completely, so the Adventurers Guild regularly sent out requests to survey the area. So the only adventurers that came here were ones who accepted the request thinking that they could gain great profits here, since there were no competitors, such as the adventurers who had attacked Zadyrus. For these reasons, the village ghouls fought against adventurers less than once a year. If one were to ask what Vigoro's apprentices were fighting, the answer would be kobolds. Grrrr. Kobolds were like dogs standing on 2 legs, a little smaller than humans. They were about as strong as humans, or perhaps slightly weaker. However, they were very agile, more intelligent than goblins and adept in group battles. They were rank 2 on average, and the higher rank ones had raced titles like Kobold Chief, Kobold Geronimo, Kobold Mage and Kobold King. The apprentices were fighting 30 normal kobolds armed with daggers and bows, 4 rank 3 kobold chiefs who were a little larger and armed with swords and spears, as well as a single rank 4 kobold mage wielding a staff. 13 of Vigoro's apprentices, as well as 3 animals and a bird opposed the kobolds. They were at an overwhelming disadvantage in terms of numbers, but ghouls are rank 3 monsters. They were winning the battle through quality over quantity. Despite that, it was a tough battle. Were they not performing well? As ghouls had a low birth rate, they couldn't afford to carelessly lose members and decrease their own numbers. Vigoro was prepared to step in himself if needed, but believed that they could win in the end. His apprentices had several strengths to play to. Halberd technique, single flash. The blade of a halberd swung with incredible force cleanly decapitated a kobold directly in front, as well as the one next to it. Ene-chan, leave the right side to me. Naginata technique, double thrust. The blade of a glaive pierced through the throat and stomach of a kobold coming from the right, protruding from the kobold's back. There are a lot of them, and they're fast. Everyone, keep attacking and stay calm. Leave their front lines to us, and be careful not to get surrounded. This was the work of the living high-leg Armasaria and the living bikini Armorita. They had spent half a year learning how to fight from Vigoro and the others. As a result, they had gained fighting skills, though they were still level 1, and they were able to use their weapons. They had learned to cover their weapons in mana and then release it upon attack, making their attacks more powerful. A master would be able to use techniques to perform dozens of stabs in an instant and cut a piece of metal to shreds using just an iron sword, But for beginners with level 1 skills, the single flash that was more powerful than a regular sweeping attack and their double thrust that performed 2 stabbing attacks was the limit. However, it was clear from the results that even beginner-level techniques were effective enough in battle. They had also become able to speak as a result of increasing their level. This was a cause of great happiness for not only Sam and Vandali, but for Vigoro and the other ghouls as well. They had been bewildered as to how to communicate with these strange. This was a cause of great happiness for not only Sam and Vandali, but for Vigoro and the other ghouls as well. They had been bewildered as to how to communicate with these strange, faceless suits of armor. Goa, Yu-Un, and Bone Monkey, Bone Wolf and Bone Bear had advanced from being rank 3 bone beasts to rank 4 rotten beasts. The 3 of them were now so strong that ordinary kobolds couldn't be considered worthy enemies for them, but they were serving as a rear guard for the apprentices that were training. From time to time, they released a poisonous breath to keep the kobolds in check and howled to intimidate them. Gee! To think that I would be able to see my children's growth even after our deaths. I am a lucky fellow. Bonebird and Sam were with Vigoro, watching the battle. Bonebird served as a scout, while Sam's service would be needed after the battle. 1. Realizing that its allies were in a disadvantageous situation, the kobold mage began reciting a chant in its own language. A spear of fire appeared in front of it. As a mage, it was intelligent enough to know that a wide area attack would hit its own allies, so it had chosen a spell that was powerful, even though it would only hit a single target. Burning the very air around it, the fiery spear was released. Its target was one of the strange living armors that were wielding long weapons. The flaming spear flew through the air, weaving in between the other kobolds, and closed in on the living armor. Rita performed a downward slash of her glaive at the spear of fire. Chest. The fiery spear disintegrated and the flames scattered about like broken fragments. Normally, a weapon of steel wouldn't destroy a spell, no matter how heavy the weapon was. However, the glaive that Rita wielded was a magic item, obtained in the treasure store of an unexplored dungeon. It had the ability to cut through a spell on the level of a flaming spear. Of course, it was better than taking a direct hit, but Rita couldn't avoid the flames that had scattered about. However, the suit of armor that Rita possessed had a resistance to fire. And since the suit of armor made up her entire body, she suffered no burns as long as the armor resisted the fire. Jai-or, Jai-ain. The final result was one exactly opposite to what the kobold mage had intended. The only ones caught up in the scattered flames were Rita and the several kobolds that she had been engaged in combat with. Yua. And then Rita gave a great swing of her glaive, scattering the kobolds who had flinched from the burns they had received and stepping into the opening in the enemy lines. Grrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr armor. They were equipped with armor and shields made from the carapaces of bug-type monsters. Rita swung her glaive downwards at one of them. The kobold chief raised its shield immediately, stopping the glaive with a loud clang. And then its dog-like face twisted in a smile. It had successfully defended her attack, and the other kobold chief would use the opportunity to attack Rita. Single flash. However, Saria, who had been standing behind Rita, separated the kobold chief's body's top half from the bottom half with a sideways slash of her halberd, straight through Rita. If Rita was a normal, living creature, then she would have certainly been harmed. However, she was a living armor. In the space that normally contained the internal organs, there was only empty air. Seeing its companion collapse with its blood and organs scattering about onto the ground, the other kobold chief froze. Ready. You. And then Rita and Saria attacked with their glaive and halberd. As if proving that it deserved its title of kobold chief, their opponent blocked the glaive with its shield and avoided the thrust of the halberd. Gah! However, it had no way to deal with the subsequent attacks of the ghoul's talons, and ended up joining its companion in death. Jaya won. There had originally been 4 kobold chiefs, now their numbers were halved and their front line had collapsed. Knowing that defeat was inevitable, the kobold mage gave the order to retreat, but it was too late. The meat is getting away. Deciding that the apprentices had got enough training, Vigoro stepped in. With this as a signal, Bonebird, who had been watching the battle up until now, attacked the goblin mage from the sky, and with the 3 rotten beasts leaping into combat as well, it didn't take much time for all of the kobolds to be defeated. And then some of the ghouls watched the surroundings while the others took the kobolds apart. The first thing they did was strip them of their weapons and armor. Kobolds mainly used things like daggers as their weapons, which were unsuitable for the physically strong ghouls, but it was possible to attach them to the ends of sticks to create spears. It was also possible to take their armor apart and reshape them for ghoul use. The kobold chiefs had normal swords and axes, and their armor was more than just fur clothing. It was made of lightweight carapace which made it very useful. The staff used by the kobold mage would be considered a treasure for a ghoul capable of using magic. Though the kobolds' furs couldn't be used for trading in the way they would be in human society, they made for good carpets in this devil's nest where commodities were limited, and they could even be used to make clothes for the next winter. The kobold chief's fangs could be used for knife blades and spear tips, and the kobold mage's mana-infused eyeballs and internal organs could be used in medicines. And of course, their meat could be harvested. Incidentally, the right ear that is used by adventurers as proof of extermination were completely ignored. That was to be expected. We'll take the kobold fruits and leaves before we go, too. Kobold fruits were the special fruit of the kobold trees that only grew in the areas of the devil's nest that the kobolds lived in. Their external appearance was that of a blue, round fruit the size of a baby. They were valuable in human society because of their pleasant, crunchy texture and sweet-sour taste. The ghouls ate them raw or squeezed them to extract the juice, but as they had other important uses, they made sure to collect them whenever they hunted kobolds. Of course, transporting 35 kobolds and their kobold fruits was a great task, but this is where Sam provided his service. We're counting on you, Father. Yes, leave it to me. But have you drained their blood properly? Of course. And Anichan and I will wash you properly afterwards, so don't worry about it. Thanks to Sam the ghost carriage, the ghouls' transport capacity was greatly increased. Unlike normal carriages and carts, Sam dealt with rough roads well and moved on his own without any external help, so he was perfect for transporting goods across the Devil's Nest. He even contributed some strength in battle, being able to easily run over and kill one or two normal kobolds. Adventurers conducting large-scale hunts in Devil's Nests would surely be jealous of Sam's abilities. But the adventurers of the Amid Empire would avoid him, as he was an undead. Today is baked kobold. It's delicious, you know. I hope your master likes it, too. Vigoro hoped that Vandali liked the meat enough to stay in the village. Vigoro's true feelings were obvious, and Saria and Rita thought the same. Botchin's training has not yet finished, so we are planning to stay a while longer. We will be in your care for some more time. Learning magic is apparently hard, huh? It hasn't even been a year since he began, right? That's about normal. Vigoro himself didn't possess the qualities of a mage, strictly speaking, he did. He was the individual that would become the next village chief, after all. However, he would need 10 years of intense, everyday training to become able to use magic. He was aware of the troubles the women of the village put themselves through in order to learn magic. If he remembered correctly, there hadn't been a single ghoul woman who had become a fully qualified mage with less than 5 years of training. With that in mind, Vandali would surely stay in the village a while longer. Feeling more satisfied with this realization than the harvest that they had gathered today, Vigoro led Sam and the others back to the village. Kobold meat tasted unpleasant. It wasn't as bad as goblin meat, but possessed a smell worse than the meat of domesticated animals that didn't disappear even with liberal use of herbs and spices. Even if the smell wasn't there, it was very tough and sinewy, it was difficult to call it edible. Therefore, nobody in human society thought of eating kobold meat unless they were desperately starving. However, for the ghouls who lived in villages in a devil's nest and gathered their food through hunting, it was different. They had discovered a way to process goblin meat to make it edible, and in the same way, they had devised a way to cook kobold meat. They cut the kobold meat into pieces of appropriate size and placed thin slices of kobold fruit on top. Then they wrapped the whole thing in kobold leaves and baked it. This made the kobold meat surprisingly tender, removed the smell cleanly, and though the resulting taste was peculiar, some individuals enjoyed it. It wasn't amazingly delicious, but it was pleasant enough for even humans to eat normally. If a professional chef were to prepare the dish, it would surely be even tastier. If this recipe were to be discovered by human society, it could cause a great sensation, or perhaps not. Kobold fruits sold for 10 amid each, or if converted, about 1,000 yen. But considering that kobold leaves didn't even have a market price, and yet removed the smell and toughness of the meat considerably, the poor people who find it hard to afford food from day to day would perhaps be glad to eat this. Well, it wouldn't make a good business, but a good social welfare measure. Vandali didn't even know if such poor people existed in Lambda, but this thought occurred to him as he ate the kobold meat. Adding walnut sauce to the final product made it taste even better, and when he recommended the sauce to Zedorus and Vigoro, they were overjoyed. Surprisingly, despite the ghouls' dedication to advancements in cuisine, it seemed that they hadn't managed to invent sauces. This was perhaps due to a difference in the ghouls' culinary culture from that of humans. Thus, Vandali's primary task at the village was to make more of this walnut sauce. Fortunately, walnuts could be harvested all year long in this devil's nest, so the ingredients for the sauce were available at all times. Several ghoul women helped him with its creation, so there wasn't too much work. In fact, he found it enjoyable. The problem was that his salt store was running low. Vandali decided he should find some bandits to attack again. He might even be able to make walnut miso, as long as he had salt. Vandali thought that he should close to the village, so he could use that to remove the harsh taste of the acorns. He was beginning to want carbohydrates as well instead of just protein, so he thought that he should make an attempt at this. I wonder if I'd consider this as contributing to society, or becoming a member of society. I feel that each day is so fulfilling. You are again speaking words that make me forget that you are not even 2 years old. But you are being of great help to us. Zedorus gave a bitter smile, but she couldn't deny the size of Vandali's contribution to the ghoul village. Even outside of making the walnut sauce, the assistance in battle that Saria, Ritu and Sam offered to Vigoro and the other warriors was significant, even after taking into account that they were receiving training in return. Saria and Rita were merely spirits of maids, but since they inhabited suits of armor that were magic items, their strength in battle was already greater than that of the ghouls that were made of flesh and blood. And since they were originally humans, they were more diligent than ghouls, so they had a positive influence on the young men. Zedorus and the other ghouls were aware that since they were under Vandali's control, their contributions were Vandali's contributions. Zedorus had taken a liking to Vandali, which was one of her personal reasons for wanting him to stay in the village, and even if he couldn't stay forever, she wanted him to stay for as long as possible. But that didn't mean that she held back on their training. But your training with no attribute magic still needs more work. Well, your progress is not particularly slow, either. Materializing and using mana before it's been affected by any attribute is harder than I had imagined. Because Vandali was already able to use death attribute magic, he should be able to learn the far more basic no attribute magic very easily. It would be a lie to say that Vandali hadn't made this assumption, but it had turned out to be a very inaccurate one. The task of maintaining mana in its original form, shaping it and then casting a spell was more difficult than Vandali had thought. When he used death attribute magic, he applied the attribute to his mana unconsciously, so it was difficult not to do that automatically. In the first place, the only thing that Vandali had going for him was his vast mana pool, as well as the imagination and way of thinking that had been produced by reading various fictional works on Earth. His talent for magic itself was mediocre. He had trained his death attribute magic during his short time in Origin, but those were in do-or-die conditions that were enough to twist his personality, with the coercion of the researchers that reached the upper limits of inhumanity. Without those, Vandali was but an ordinary person. But he had the advantage of being able to practice magic for longer than the average person, thanks to his vast mana pool. Well, it took me 3 years to obtain the no attribute magic skill myself. You do not need to rush yourself. Here, you can have my portion of meat. Zedorus smiled as she offered Vandali the remaining meat on the leaves. She likely thought of their relationship as that between a grandparent and grandchild, but in reality, they simply looked like siblings born some years apart. Is it really all right? Vandali eyed the meat that Zedorus offered him. It seemed that she had barely touched the meat at all. Yes. I do not have much of an appetite. The elderly do not move around much, so we do not need to eat a lot. Though Zedorus didn't have a single wrinkle on her face, when she wasn't training Vandali or the young girls of the village, it was common for her to say, I am tired and dressed. She looked like a 13 or 14-year-old girl, but Zedorus was over 290 years old. It was understandable for her to behave as such at that age, but I can see the shadow of death. Vandali could see the shadow of death on Zedorus's face, alongside her gentle smile. It wasn't enough that she would die at any moment, but she might only last a few more days. The shadow of death was thick enough that even if things progressed slower, Vandali knew that she wouldn't live long enough to see his second birthday. Though ghouls had a lifespan of 300 years, it wasn't strange to think that an individual's lifespan could be a little shorter than that. In fact, it was impressive that she had survived this long in a devil's nest, where every creature had to fight for its own survival. It would be a peaceful death for this individual, who had no blood-related grandchildren of her own. Pretending like nothing was wrong and seeing her off like this was probably the correct, natural thing to do. Zadirus-san, can we be alone for a moment? However, that might not be the natural thing to do. Defying the laws of life and death was something that Vandali would have preferred to attempt after increasing the levels of his skills a little more, but he decided to give it a try. Even if it was for a reason like taking responsibility for shortening her lifespan by surprising her so much not long ago. Name: Bone Monkey, Bone Wolf, Bone Bear. Rank: 4 Ace, Rotten Beast. Level: 710. Passive skills: Night Vision. Superhuman Strength, Level 2, Level Up. Spirit Form, Level 2, Level Up. Active skills: Silent Steps, Level 2, Level Up. Breath Poison, Level 1, New. Monster Explanation: Rotten Beast. These are rank 4 monsters. They contain miasma in their bones as a result of the malice of the spirits that inhabit the bones of the bone beasts, as well as the malice of the creatures killed by them. Some of the bones that make up their bodies are blackened and are as strong as steel. Regardless of what animal's bones they are made of, they are able to release a poisonous breath. For D-class adventurers, they have little to fear fighting against a single rotten beast as long as they have a way to deal with the poison breath, but depending on the original animal the rotten beasts are made of, they may retain their instincts to move in groups. Therefore, the Adventurers Guild recommends that adventurers form parties to exterminate them. Skill Explanation: Coordination. When owners of this skill cooperate, their efficiency and effectiveness is greater. When building something, they make fewer mistakes and their pace of work is faster, and in battle, their offensive and defensive abilities are increased. The effectiveness of the skill depends on the levels of the skill and the number of individuals that possess the skill. It is less common for adventurers that operate in small groups to obtain this skill, and more common for soldiers and construction workers that work together in larger numbers. In the case of monsters, they cannot gain this skill even if they work in large numbers unless they possess a sense of companionship and unity with each other, so goblins and orcs cannot gain this skill. Monsters such as kobolds, ghouls and wolf-type monsters often possess this skill. Chapter 14, The Lessons of Applying Anti-Aging to the Teacher. At Vandali's sudden request to be alone, Zadirus opened her eyes wide in surprise. Alone, you say? Yes, it's a very important matter. As Vandali spoke to Zadirus with an unusually firm tone, Zadirus wondered whether he had decided to finish his training and leave the village. She had heard that he was headed for the country of Orborm, beyond the mountain range to the east of this devil's nest. However, he had not yet finished learning no attribute magic, mana control or alchemy. Zadirus wouldn't tell him to make this village his home, but she wanted him to stay a little longer. Very well. Let us speak in my house. Thinking that she should persuade him to stay longer somehow, she picked up Vandali in her arms and headed for her own home. I can walk myself. I'm going to be 2 years old soon. You are not 2 years old yet, boy. Did you not say that a while ago and trip over a stone? Vandali had thought that he had come closer to adulthood now that he was nearly 2 years old, but from others' point of view, he was but an infant who had come just a little closer to becoming a young boy. They entered Zadirus's pit dwelling in which Vandali normally received his lessons on magic. Inside, there were alchemy-related tools that Zadirus had invented herself, as well as a crystal ball that apparently had some use sitting in a conspicuous spot. If there were a cauldron, then this might have been the perfect description of the home of a witch straight out of a fairy tale, but such a cauldron was absent. Say, boy. If possible, I wish to teach you all of the spells that I know. Zadirus spoke with a serious expression as she sat down on the rug. They were not words of gratitude for saving her life or of wanting to repay his contributions to the village, but words expressing her expectations of him. Boy, you have no real talent in the normal sense of the word. I am sure that you have noticed yourself that you are learning slowly. However, you possess a lot of insight and sense that compensates for that. The insight and sense that Zadirus spoke of were ideas from the fictional works that Vandali had read and seen on Earth, the information that he had obtained from spirits in origin and the power of imagination that was derived from those. Vandali, being aware of this, didn't think that it was insight or sense or anything worthy of praise. Most importantly, you possess that outlandish amount of mana. If you were to devote yourself to study, it would not even take you 100 years to become a great mage that I could not even compare to. Simply possessing a lot of mana didn't make one a powerful mage, but the size of one's mana pool was still a component that couldn't be ignored. In this world, the level of a skill increased the more one used it. Therefore, a large mana pool was essential to support the repeated casting of magic necessary to increase the level of one's skill. For humans, the bonuses to skills they received from magic-related jobs were important, but even those jobs required certain skills to be at certain levels to obtain the jobs in the first place. And so, for both humans and monsters that wished to become mages, the first step was to learn basic magic and do everything they could to increase their mana pools. In the case of monsters, it was common to give up without being able to put in the effort required or die before becoming a mage, so a lot of it depended on their talent for magic. In that regard, Vandali was very fortunate. He didn't need to go through lessons to frantically increase the size of his mana pool. No, one's mana pool naturally expanded even without lessons. At any rate, he was not even 2 years old yet and his mana pool exceeded 100 million. As he grew older, it would increase by tens of millions more or perhaps even increase by another 100 million. And so even if he learned somewhat slowly, Vandali had enough talent for such concerns to not be a problem. Those were the expectations that Zediris had for him. He wouldn't be just her successor, but something far greater. That is why I wish for more time. I am aware that you are on a journey with a purpose. But will you not give me a little more time? Yes, please leave it to me. Vandali gave an immediate reply. Oh, so you have come to see my side of things. Though Zediris found the way Vandali had worded it a little strange, she was happy with his response. However, as he continued speaking, she realized that there had been some kind of misunderstanding. Well then, I'm going to begin treating you right away, so please lie down and make yourself comfortable. Treating? Yes. Please leave it to me. On one hand, Vandali looked full of motivation. Since he had an aptitude for death attribute magic, he could see the shadow of death on Zediris's face, the presence of death around her. That was why he had decided to extend her lifespan. Vandali had thought that the greatest obstacle to doing this would be Zediris's own wishes. Zediris had been saying things like I do not have long to live and I already have a successor ready. She hadn't seemed particularly fixated on staying alive. Vandali had been worried that she might reject the idea of having her life extended by magic. However, she was now saying, give me more time. If she had said, I will let things run their course, or it is best for me to pass naturally, or doubted Vandali when he told her that her death was close, he wouldn't have known what to do. But to think that Zediris would be aware of her own impending death and even put enough trust in Vandali to ask him to extend her life. Vandali was moved. Realizing what a happy thing it was to be trusted by someone else, he felt like crying. However, it was just a misunderstanding. This is necessary for you to learn more magic from me, is it? Yes. There is no other way. Zediris's age was at a point where she might last as little as a few days, or a month at most. The only way to continue learning magic from her was to extend her lifespan. Alright. But what are you doing? Zediris laid down, face up. This reminded Vandali of the first time he met her. Just like now, he was trying to save her life back then. I'm going to make you a little younger. Eh? Make me younger? There is no way such a thing is possible. With a bizarre sensation, Zediris watched as Vandali's hands and arms sank into her stomach, all the way up to his forearms. Huh? Zediris opened her eyes wide in surprise and was rendered breathless by the foreign sensation of having her internal organs being stroked by a pair of cold hands. Right now, I have used spirit form transformation and my hands to directly examine your body's situation. I know it is a little painful, but please bear with it. Cold sweat formed on Zediris's face as she looked up at Vandali to complain to him with her eyes, but he didn't notice as he was focused on what he was doing. It was actually his first time examining someone else's body using spirit form transformation, so he didn't know just how painful it would be for the subject. However, he had a good understanding of how to do it correctly. Like a veteran surgeon, when he was being toyed around with by the researchers of Origin, they had forced him to use a spirit form transformation to examine various things. This included other living subjects like himself and lead containers of nuclear waste. The mana produced by Vandali had been used to create magic items that allowed the use of spirit form transformation and greatly advanced medicine and science in Origin. Putting that aside, he was examining Zediris's body right now. The spirit form transformation had taken Vandali's arms out of physical existence and they were now plunged into her abdomen. He imagined his arms dissolving into a liquid-like state and getting carried away by Zadyrus's circulatory system, flowing into every corner of her body. And then Vandali's arms melted smoothly, just as he had imagined. His spirit form was directly linked to his mind, so this kind of thing was possible when using spirit form transformation. I feel like it's easier than it was in Origin. Is that because my mental strength has increased? Or is it because doing this of my own will is different from being forced to do it? Vandali was surprised that it was so simple, but this wasn't the time to lose himself in his thoughts. He had noticed the agony that Zadyrus was in. He cut unnecessary thoughts from his mind in order to get the treatment finished as quickly as possible. Blood vessels, brain, heart, nerves, stomach, liver, kidneys, pancreas, small intestine, large intestine, ovaries, uterus, bones, muscles, lymph, skin. Their locations and shapes were mostly identical to humans. The only difference Vandali could see in Zadyrus's body was that there were glands that produced the paralyzing venom that was secreted from her claws. Other than the fact that the function of her organs were weakened, her condition was satisfactory. In short, there were no loose blood vessels, aneurysms, cancer or anything like that that might be a cause of death, and no sign of any viral or fungal infection. It seemed that the cause of her impending death was old age after all. Since the cause was old age, the methods of dealing with it were difficult but simple to understand. First, Vandali had to choose from one of three methods. The first was using death attribute magic to halt the breakdown of Zadyrus's cells, while having another mage use life attribute magic to revitalize her organs to restore their declining function. This technique had been used in Origin, but there were no life attribute mages available, so this method was impossible. Since Vandali could only use death attribute magic, he was only capable of speeding up or slowing down cell death. Unlike life attribute magic that controlled life itself, he couldn't grant vitality to another. If it were a wound, I would stop cell death while applying a potion. But surely even potions aren't powerful enough to cure old age. Well then, on to the second method. The second method was to take measures to support her life, using a spell to directly preventing her from getting closer to death. That was a simple, sure method that would work. At the very least, as long as Vandali cast the spell on her regularly, Zadyrus could continue living in her current state. But I reject that method. Looking at it another way, that method would only maintain her current situation. If he was treating a hemorrhage or an allergic reaction, he could postpone her death and let her body's natural recovery mechanisms get her through it, but in the case of dealing with old age, it was simply delaying the inevitable. Zadyrus would never recover and forever be in her weakened state. And since Vandali would need to cast the spell regularly, Zadyrus would die soon after he left the village. There would be no point in such a treatment option. Such a method would allow Vandali to continue learning magic from her. But leaving aside what he stood to gain from this, he didn't want Zadyrus to die. That left one option. The most difficult method, something that researchers on Origin had failed to accomplish, the reversal of age that mankind always dreamed of. It was a technique that removed the age from the cells and caused restoration of youth. In the experiments in Origin, restoring the youth of individual parts of the body such as the skin, blood vessels and bones had succeeded, but there had never been a successful experiment that reversed the aging of the entire body. But those had been experiments conducted by someone else controlling Vandali's body and mind. And though his ability with magic had decreased since dying in Origin and being reincarnated in Lambda, his mana pool had grown. Let's try with the usual forceful approach. First, he let his transformed spirit form arms diffuse throughout Zadyrus's entire body. Conscious of Zadyrus's moaning, he tried to be as careful as possible as he let his spirit form diffuse into her capillaries, her skin cells and the ends of her nerves. Youth transformation. And then he began to pull the death from her body. Masters of the fire attribute control not flames, but heat directly. They are able to freely increase heat to melt a steel bar, or decrease heat and freeze the surface of an ocean. In the same way, as a user of death attribute magic, Vandali controlled death directly and theoretically should be able to freely control whether a creature lived or died. Curfew. Like gently scooping up dirt that had gathered over time, Vandali steadily removed the death caused by old age from Zadyrus's cells. And slowly but surely, Zadyrus's age began to reverse. The energy returned to her cells and her organs began to work vigorously once more. This takes a lot more mana than I'd thought it would. The mana cost of every other spell that Vandali had cast up until now was incomparable to the amount of mana he was spending on this process. It was costing him 10 million mana for each year of Zadyrus's age that he reversed. Boy, wow, what are you? Fortunately, Zadyrus seemed to not be in the discomfort that she was in before, but in pleasure. Since Vandali had to reverse the aging on her whole body evenly, he had to patiently and calmly maintain the spell properly, which was easier to do knowing that Zadyrus wasn't suffering. For now, I've made you a little younger. Made me younger? Such a thing is not UEI. To be more accurate, I've simply removed the aging from your body, so you won't turn back into a child or anything like that. It wasn't as if he had reversed time. Even though he had reversed her age, there was no way she would turn into a fetus or anything of the sort. Removing one's aging was simply the opposite of moving one closer to death. If Vandali did the same to an aged human, the process would likely stop in the mid-teenage years. Though if he studied harder and came up with different methods, he might even be able to turn a human back into a zygote. Pure. Unable to contain herself, Zadyrus let out a high-pitched voice. The pleasant feeling of one's stiff muscles and pain being relieved spread throughout her entire body, not only in her limbs and torso, but even inside her head. She couldn't keep her mouth closed against this intense pleasure that was greater than being treated by an expert masseuse. And as she let out all the breath from her lungs, that pleasure suddenly stopped. Ha boy. As Zadyrus regained control over her breathing and looked over at Vandali, he was lying on his back. The arms that had been in spirit form inside Zadyrus's abdomen were now back to their normal, physical state. It's been a while since I used my mana to its limit. I'll sleep a little. Vandali's mana pool was completely exhausted from reversing Zadyrus's age by 10 years, so he had quickly returned his arms to their physical state and collapsed, and now he was making the noises of a sleeping person. It would not have killed you to explain yourself a little more. Zadyrus whispered these words as she felt her own eyelids grow heavy as well. The fatigue that she had felt the past few days had disappeared, but a feeling of exhaustion, as if she had just finished some heavy exercise, lingered in her body. It was a very strange sensation. The aging of all the cells of her entire body had been reversed, and this exhaustion was the side effect of her body undergoing such a large change in such a short period of time. However, as ghouls stopped physically aging at the time of their first pregnancy, the process didn't affect her physical appearance. If Zadyrus had been a human, she would have likely passed out on the spot. Well, it is fine. It seems that you have done something that benefits me, and I am sure that nothing bad will happen. Now, let me sleep a little as well. Cuddling closely to Vandali, who was already asleep, Zadyrus fell asleep on the rug. And a young ghoul warrior by the name of Mage, who had spotted the chief of the village and the guest who was being treated like a full member of the community disappear in the middle of the feast, was standing outside Zadyrus's house, swallowing his saliva. He had seen Zadyrus and Vandali entering her pit dwelling. And when he had put his ear against the wall, he had heard Zadyrus's moans and screams of pleasure. Who would have thought that the chief and Vandali would to be able to do it at that age? Dampers are amazing. Bernard whispered to himself with an expression of awe on his lion-shaped face. He should stop the others from treating Vandali as a child. Vandali was already a fully fledged adult, no, a king. The next day, as Zadyrus ate with a large appetite, she showed amazement at what death attribute magic could do when Vandali explained what he had done, but also scolded him for not explaining what he was doing first. However, that makes little difference to the fact that you have saved my life twice now. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am grateful enough that if you were a tamer, I would gladly be tamed by you and become your servant. Now then, how shall I return the favor? The races that Veda had spawned that had originated from monsters could be tamed. The chances of being tamed successfully were low, as they possessed human-level intelligence and they had originated from a goddess. However, if the individual desired to be tamed, it was a different story. More than just wanting to repay Vandali for saving her life by giving him her own, Zadyrus said those words because she had become interested by the idea of following him wherever he went. Though her heart throbbed in a way unfitting for her age, she couldn't decide this easily because of her social position. I'd be happy if you came with me, Zadyrus-san, but wouldn't the village have problems if you did that? As Vandali pointed that out, Zadyrus came out from her fantasies and back to reality. Well, you are right. The village would do well without me, but there is not yet a mage to replace me, so that is a source of concern. She did think that the village would be fine without her, but now that her life had been extended, she had new desires. She wanted to teach her skills to other young women as well as Vandali, and she was worried about whether her youngest daughter Basdia would be able to have a child. And I still haven't learned no attribute magic or mana control yet, so I'll be in your care a little longer. Oh, I see. I am relieved to hear that. Well then, let us hurry and begin our lesson. My mana hasn't recovered completely yet, so please wait a little longer. After that, they ate gobble-gobble for breakfast and then began another lesson. However, from today onwards, their lessons would end in another session of age reversal treatment for Zadyrus. One's mana pool increased as one's level increased, but like other attribute values and skills, it also increased with use. However, since Vandali's mana pool was so vast, this method of increasing his mana pool had been mostly impossible for him. Vandali's mana exceeded 100 million. To use up all of that mana, a spell that cost 10,000 mana would need to be cast 10,000 times. Assuming that each cast took 10 seconds, 10,000 casts would take 100,000 seconds. That would be 27 hours. It would take over a whole day. However, that would be 27 hours. It would take over a whole day. However, casting Eouth transformation on Zadyrus took only 10 minutes, even if he cast it until he used up all his mana and fainted. And so he had no attribute magic and mana control lessons in the morning, and in the afternoon, he made walnut sauce and acorn powder. After that, he took an afternoon nap like an infant should. In the evening, he had a continuation of the lessons from the morning, and before going to bed, he performed the Eouth transformation on Zadyrus at her house until he fainted. And then he would sleep. He began to spend every day living this cycle. It was quite the hard schedule, but it wasn't so difficult after he came up with the idea to create stone golems out of a mortar and pestle. He broke the acorns into smaller pieces, washed them, dried them and then simply added the pieces to the mortar and ordered the pestle to spin, and it would automatically crush them into powder. It was even more ecologically friendly than the electric-powered mortars and pestles on Earth. And of course, they decided to keep the Eouth transformation spell a secret. It wasn't that they didn't trust the other ghouls of the village, and as ghouls had long lifespans, they wouldn't have much desire to become younger. After all, monsters often died fighting, not of old age. Individuals like Zadyrus who lived out to the end of their lifespans were really rare. However, the thought of adventurers capturing a ghoul alive, interrogating them and finding out about the Eouth transformation was terrifying. An enormous bounty would be placed on Vandali's head, and countless adventurers and mercenaries would hunt Vandali down relentlessly. And if Vandali was caught, his freedom would be taken away in a variety of ways, and he would live the rest of his life as a pet that lived only to extend the lifespans of noblemen and royalty. Neither Vandali nor the ghouls, whose village would likely be destroyed by such events, would want this. That was why they had decided to keep it a secret. How is the expansion of your mana pool? It increases by less than 1% a day. I suppose it's something like, even dust can pile up to form a mountain, and perseverance results in improvement. But 1% for you, boy, is 1 million. Is that not a little too large to be referred to as dust? And so, day by day, Zadyrus grew younger. As ghouls were a race whose physical appearance didn't change, no obvious changes occurred. However, she began to move with vigor, her voice grew stronger and her eyes grew brighter, changes that even outsiders would be able to see. Whereas she had rejected food in the past, her appetite had returned, and her skin and hair looked brighter. Of course, the other ghouls noticed this. What could be clearly observed was that Zadyrus and Vandali would be together in Zadyrus's house for their lessons, and not come out until the morning. If one listened carefully, Zadyrus's stifled moans of pleasure could be heard. And Zadyrus looked healthier and healthier, day by day. As a result, an obvious misunderstanding occurred. Normally, the ghouls would assume that a 1-year-old boy wouldn't be able to do such a thing, but Vandali was of a different race. Wouldn't it be possible for an unfamiliar race to reach maturity at a different rate? Perhaps a damp could do it at that age. He was far more mature than he appeared, too. It didn't take long for the ghouls to begin thinking this. I'm not sure if it's dampers that are amazing, or Vandali who's amazing. Maybe I should seduce him as well. Rather than wishing I had a daughter, maybe I should have done something about it. That old chief looks like a young girl now. Is that what it means to be in love? I know it's strange coming from me, but isn't it at the point where we can call him the head of the family now? Vigoro, don't say that, you're the young chief here. And to think, when I'd asked him to stay here when he first came to the village, he told me it was impossible. Vigoro, I wonder if we should tell Bochin about these strange rumors. However, it would be an impertinent thing to do if they were true. Sam, father, should we try indirectly, casually asking him if the rumors are true? Saria, I guess that's what you'd expect from someone who wants to be a nobleman. Does that mean that we have a chance as well? Rita. Finally, Sam and Saria had begun to worry about the situation, while Rita made a carefree joke. In July, with his second birthday coming up and full-blown summer approaching, Vandali finally obtained their no-attribute magic and mana control skills at level 1. He was happy that he had been able to obtain these skills in less than a year after having been told that it normally takes multiple years, but according to Dasu and Sam, level 1 in these skills was considered less than apprentice level in society. Incidentally, the mage among the adventurers who had attacked Zadyrus had possessed a level 2 skill in no-attribute magic. I've got a long road ahead of me, I guess. Looking up at the sky, Vandali was in a bright mood. He felt proud. No-attribute magic was something that may not have existed in origin, and if that was the case, then that meant that he was one step ahead of Amamiya Hiroto and the others who were still enjoying their second lives in that world. It was a small step, but continuing these steps would lead directly to a safe future for himself. Also, he had stopped the exercise in which he exhausted his whole mana pool to cast Earth Transformation on Zadyrus. This was because the age of Zadyrus's body now matched its physical appearance. I do not know what would happen if you were to continue, and this is more than enough. I suppose so, since you have over 200 years now before you reach the end of your lifespan again. His mana pool had increased quite a lot, and he would have liked to continue if possible, but there were no other ghouls in the village over 250 years old. And since going around using Earth Transformation and the other ghouls would make it hard to keep it a secret, he had no choice but to stop. If he got the chance to attack bandits again, it might be a good idea to cast Earth Transformation on them before finishing them off. As Vandali thought about this, he split an acorn's shell and broke apart the flesh inside. As he prepared to wash it, he suddenly became aware of a ghoul woman who was working with him. No, he hadn't forgotten that the woman was there. Though the ghoul population was large for a group of monsters, it was low for a village. Vandali had already remembered the faces of each of the 100 or so ghouls. Of course, he hadn't become close friends with all of them, but he had become friendly enough with them to greet each other normally and have light conversations. Bilda-san, can I ask you something? Her name was Bilda. She was one of the ghoul women who had pampered Vandali during the feast when he had first come to the village, though the treatment had been quite rough. What is it? Should I crush the acorns a little smaller? She looked at him in surprise. No matter how one looked at her, her stomach hadn't expanded at all. At that feast, Vandali recalled that she had said that she was pregnant. That feast was in October, last year. Now it was July. Roughly 9 months had passed. Vandali had no way of knowing how many months pregnant she had been in October. No, it's about your promise to name your child after me if it was a boy. Vandali had spoken up because he was curious, but was this question really alright to ask? He began to doubt himself and his voice grew quieter and quieter as he spoke, but Bilda seemed surprised that he had remembered and didn't pay it any more attention as she replied. Sorry, the child that was in my belly back then, I failed to give birth to it. If I succeed with the next one, I'll name him after you, okay? I see, then next time huh? Bilda spoke with a giggle, narrowing her yellow eyes as she poked out her tongue and there wasn't a trace of seriousness in her voice. Vandali understood her words perfectly. He did a double take out of surprise as he saw her expression, but it seemed that his eyes and ears were not deceiving him. Such a pity, you know, not even one baby was born last year. Mine didn't even last 2 months. Were you the one who lasted the longest, Bilda? Yeah, I almost reached 3 months. The other women also showed no sign of seriousness or covering their pain with light-hearted talk. It did seem that they were disappointed, but all things considered, their attitude was very carefree. Perhaps there had been some uncontrollable circumstances but they showed no signs of that, either. Does that mean that I'm next after Chief Zadyrus? Wait, Van, in that case, let me be first. Basdias-san, I have something I want to ask you. Come over here. As the conversation had rolled into a ridiculous direction, Vandali decided to consult Basdia, to whom he was closest to among the village members other than Zadyrus and Vigoro. From behind him, he could hear Bilda say after Basdia, I'm next and the replies of can I go after you and I should be after her This would have made him happy if it were physically possible for him, but since it wasn't, he ignored it. Van, I'm happy that you've chosen me, but to do it in the middle of the afternoon. Basdia-san, there's something I want to ask you. Vandali interrupted the words of Basdia, who was misunderstanding something as he had suspected. You're wondering why Bilda and the others aren't grieving over the fact that they couldn't give birth to their children? Well, Van, that's because unsuccessful births are more common than successful ones. According to Basdia, ghouls as a race had difficulty getting pregnant, and miscarriages in the early months of pregnancy were common. The exact probability of pregnancy and the ratio of children born successfully were unknown. However, ghouls had always said that only 1 in every 5 children was born safely. No matter how one thought of it, that rate of birth was far too low, but it was compensated for by the ghoul's lifespan of 300 years. At least, up until now. Bilder and the others aren't grieving much because that's normal, isn't it? There are some ghouls who grieve over the loss of their children, but they're quite rare. I suppose the reason you find it strange, Van, is because grieving is normal for humans. It was normal for them, so they didn't find it very sad. If one were to ask someone on Earth, they would get angry and reply, died. How could it possibly be alright? However, this was another world and these were ghouls. The circumstances were too different. Ghouls had lived with this way of life for 100,000 years, and seeing the village's circumstances, it was obvious that they didn't interact with other races. That was why they had no doubt in what they knew. If ghouls lived together with other races, then perhaps they would grieve over the fact that many of their children were not successfully born compared to other races and doubt themselves. However, living on their own, they simply thought that things had always been this way and there was no helping it. The time during which the miscarriages occurred was also a cause. They happened in the early months of pregnancy, before the mothers had expanding stomachs or produced milk. There was no ultrasound scanning in this world, but even if there was, the miscarriages occurred in the period of time where it wouldn't even be possible to determine whether the baby was a boy or a girl. It was no wonder that they had such little reaction to losing their children. Well, at the very least, I don't think it's something that you should discuss with a bright look on your face. Probably. You think so too, huh? It seemed that Basdia had also learned about the differences between ghouls and humans during this conversation with Vandali. Up until now, we've only had goblins, kobolds and orcs to compare ourselves to. And all we thought about the matter is that we don't like how they multiply everywhere, even though they're weaker than us. A thought occurred to Vandali. Could it be possible that ghouls' envy of goblins and kobolds was one of the reasons that they invented ways to eat them? I see. I've come to an understanding after having you think about it. I've always found it strange that I've never seen any children in the village. Vandali had never seen any ghoul children in this village. He had never heard the crying voice of a baby. There were only ghouls that he had thought were children, but were simply young-looking because they had conceived a baby at an early age like Zadyrus. He had felt strange about the fact that there were no children in this village, even though 100 adult ghouls living here. He had assumed that perhaps the ghouls were still wary of him and the undead, and hidden the infants and children somewhere. However, he had become focused on the magic lessons and had forgotten all about this strange feeling and his doubts. However, the simple truth was that there were just no children. If Vandali had assertively tried to find ghoul children, Zadyrus and Vigoro would have told him that right away. For them, it was a trivial matter of fact. And now he understood why ghouls were so proactive about sex. It was difficult for them to get pregnant, and only 1 in 5 pregnancies ended in a successful birth. They had no choice but to be proactive about it. If that's the case, then it can't be helped, can it? Vandali intended not to say anything more regarding this problem. This was a problem that the ghoul race had shouldered for 100,000 years. Since the ghouls had still managed to survive up until now, he thought that there was no need for him to rack his brains and come up with a solution. In fact, seeing the village, he could see that this wasn't putting the ghouls at risk. With that being the case, nobody had asked him to do anything about it, so trying to do something would be needless meddling. But if someone were to ask him to do something about it, it would be a different story. You might be right in saying that it can't be helped, but there hasn't been a child born in this village for the past 10 years. Mother and Vigoro are worrying about it as well. It's impossible with Mother's magic, but could something be done about it using your magic, Van? Of course, me wanting to become pregnant is one reason, but I also want to give birth to a healthy child if I do manage to become pregnant. Someone asked him to do something about it. I understand. I'll try to think of something. So it was a different story. Name, Vandali race, Damper, Dark Elf age, 2 years, 1 month old title, non-job, non-level, 100 job history, non-attributes, vitality, 42 mana, 113,550,000 strength, 37 agility, 13 stamina, 39 intelligence, 60 passive skills, superhuman strength, level 1 rapid healing, Level 2 Death Attribute Magic, Level 3 Status Effect Resistance, Level 3 Magic Resistance, Level 1 Dark Vision Mental Corruption, Level 10 Death Attribute Charm, Level 3, Level Up. Chant Revocation, Level 1 Strengthen Followers, Level 1, New. Active Skills, Blood Sucking, Level 3 Surpass Limits, Level 2 Golem Transmutation, Level 2 No Attribute Magic, Level 1, New. Mana Control, Level 1, New. Curses, experience gained in previous life not carried over, cannot learn existing jobs, unable to gain experience points independently. Chapter 15, The Half-Vampire Solving the Problem of Declining Birth Rates and the Noble.
Hello? Oh, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, guys, this is it for today. I think will be the. Let's leave it here for now. I finished um, the values and shading for this concept art. So I'm kind of satisfied what it's been. It's nice. I think it's really interesting now, and I do have some few issues, but I think for something that I'm doing for something that I drawn for the first time for a very long time from my last concept art that I did. I think it's better compared to that. Mm, Still going to look at it tomorrow. I'll see what I can change or do something different. Probably change the position of the weapon because it's probably dividing the entire canvas into two. uh, I don't know. I'll look at it. I'll see some references tomorrow. What I can do with this. hmm And this too. Probably change some. Uh, Fix the shading a bit. But yeah, most of it, it's pretty good. It's shaping really well, and I can see how I should color it afterwards. And I'm excited. Let's see what I can come up in the coming days to what I should do with this. But yeah, overall, it's a very good work for today, and I'm very happy with it. And uh, let's just see what I can come up with with the improvements. But yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm talking in circles. Anyways, from what we've read today from chapter 12 to 14, yeah, 12 to 14, the dead mage who doesn't want a fourth time. So the story is getting really interesting. Now that he managed to make friends with the kobold community and the wonderful things that he managed to do with his friends and his new friends. Well, think that he can reverse aging. Hopefully, we can learn that kind of magic here in the real world also, so that everyone can just be young as always. uh, so yeah. So his arrival in this world is actually one thing I like about it is that he's the one who's like improving the entire world with his existence, and that's like the goal of the god who actually reincarnated them all. He wants the the people that he reincarnated to go to Lambda and improve the society there by introducing new culture and new new type of magic and more improvements. But right now, the guy that he deemed that is useless is now doing the thing he was wanting to do. And let's just see what will happen in the next chapters. And to the god named Rod Courtney, what's his reaction after seeing what's happening in the the world of Landa. There's a lot more implications of why uh, he was reincarnated in that world, but I won't spoil anything. Just look forward of to the plot twist is coming. But yeah, okay. So now we are on next chapter will be chapter 15, and hopefully this week I can still manage to do a another stream for this video because for this series. I mean, okay, because I might be a bit busy, but I'll try my best, and hopefully that I won't be too tired also, because the supplements that I'm taking right now, I actually stopped drinking my supplements because it's making me really drowsy sometimes even when I'm doing my work. So yeah. But anyways, thank you guys for watching my video, and if you enjoyed it, just please leave a like. And regarding with the audiobook, you can listen to it if you want to continue the story on your own in Novels.pl, and please support it because it's a very nice website. And also, uh, once again, this is your boy Shrimp, and I'm signing off. Thank you very much.